Ever wondered how forgiveness can truly change your life? Today on Mindcode Vault, we're uncovering 5 life-changing lessons from forgiving what you can't forget that you absolutely must know. If you want more insights like this, don't forget to like, share, comment, and hit that subscribe button. Let's start the video. There is a weight that some people carry for years, decades. Even then they have learned to call it by other names. They call it caution, they call it wisdom, they call it knowing better. But if you sit with them long enough, if the conversation goes deep enough, they will eventually tell you the truth. Someone hurt them in a way they cannot seem to move past. And no matter how many times they have tried to let it go, the wound keeps finding its way back to the surface. A sharp word from a stranger that sounds too much like the voice of a parent who never believed in them. A moment of betrayal in a new friendship that resurrects a ghost of an old one. A quiet evening that should feel peaceful but instead fills with a low, persistent hum of something unresolved. This is what unprocessed pain does. It does not disappear with time. It shapeshifts. It follows you into your career, into your relationships, into the way you parent, into the way you love, into the way you see yourself when no one else is watching. This audiobook is about that. And more specifically, it is about what happens when you finally decide to put it down, not because the person who hurt you deserves your forgiveness, but because you deserve your freedom. Lisa Turkhurst wrote Forgiving What You Can't Forget out of her own devastation. This was not a book born in theory. It was born in the wreckage of a marriage that collapsed under the weight of repeated betrayal, in the middle of a season when forgiveness felt not only impossible but, frankly, insulting. And what she discovered, what she had to fight her way to understanding, changed not only her relationship with the people who hurt her, but her relationship with herself and with the future she thought she had lost forever. These are the 5 most life-changing lessons buried inside that journey. And by the time you finish listening, you will understand why ignoring them is not simply a personal choice. It is a quiet form of self-destruction. The first lesson is one that most people resist with everything they have, because it dismantles one of the most deeply held beliefs about what forgiveness actually means. Here it is. Forgiving someone does not mean you are saying what they did was acceptable. It does not mean you are minimizing the damage. It does not mean you are pretending the relationship is what it was before the wound, or that trust has been magically restored, or that you are required to place yourself in harm's way again. This confusion, the belief that to forgive is to excuse, is the single greatest reason people stay stuck. Because if forgiveness means approval, then withholding forgiveness becomes an act of justice. It becomes the only power left in a situation where you felt completely powerless, and holding on to that power feels necessary. It feels protective. What Lisa forces us to confront is that this protection is an illusion, and a costly one. Think about what happens in a business context when a founder is betrayed by a co-founder, their intellectual property stolen, their vision hijacked, their trust weaponized. The wounded founder has every legal and moral right to be furious. But what happens when that fury becomes the organizing principle of the next 10 years of their life? They build the next company not out of passion but out of spite. Every hiring decision is filtered through distrust. Every partnership is entered with one foot already out the door. Investors can feel the bitterness radiating off their pitch decks. The wound that happened once begins to compound interest, charging a fee on every future decision. The person who wronged them years ago is no longer present, but they are still running the show. This is what unresolved unforgiveness does in every arena of life. It hands the keys of your future to someone who already proved they would not take care of them. Lisa writes about what she calls the prison of our own making. The idea that when we refuse to process a wound toward forgiveness, we lock ourselves in a cell built from our own pain and then mistake the walls for protection. In the economy we now inhabit, where freelancers pitch clients, where solopreneurs build personal brands, where your ability to form genuine connection is a direct driver of your income, carrying an invisible wall of unprocessed bitterness is not just an emotional problem, it is a professional one. People can sense when someone is operating from a wound. They may not be able to name it, but they feel the guardedness, the preemptive defensiveness, the slight edge of distrust that flavors every interaction. Learning to separate forgiveness from condoning is not soft work. It is strategic. It is the work that clears the channel through which everything else, creativity, connection, opportunity, love, must flow. The second lesson is both more uncomfortable and more liberating than the first. Turkhurst introduces what she calls the trail of pain, and she asks her readers to follow it backward. Every trigger you experience today, every disproportionate reaction, every moment when someone says something mildly unkind and you feel a wound that seems far too large for the offense, these are clues. They are pointing you towards something, old or something unaddressed. The person who cut you off in traffic did not create the rage that rose up in your chest. They activated it. The colleague who took credit for your idea did not generate the shame spiral that followed. They touched something that was already there. This is not about excusing present harm or asking you to minimize what someone did to you recently. It is about recognizing that what hurts the most in the present often has roots in the past that has never been fully processed. This lesson has profound implications for anyone trying to build something meaningful in their life. In the current AI-augmented economy, where human skills like empathy, discernment, creativity, and emotional intelligence are the ones that machines cannot replicate, the ability to understand your own emotional patterns is not a luxury. It is a competitive advantage. The most effective leaders, coaches, writers, therapists, and entrepreneurs alive today are the ones who have done enough inner work to distinguish between what is happening now and what the now is merely triggering from. Then they respond rather than react. They can sit across from a difficult client, a challenging partner, or a disappointing outcome without the whole machinery of an old wound hijacking their response. They have followed the trail of pain backward far enough to stop being ambushed by it going forward. The practical step here is not easy, but it is simple. The next time you find yourself having an emotional reaction that seems larger than the situation warrants, get curious instead of dismissive. Do not tell yourself you are overreacting. Ask yourself what this feeling reminds you of. Ask yourself the last time you felt this exact quality of pain. You are not going back to wallow. You are going back to locate the source of a leak that has been draining your energy for years. Lysis framework gives us permission to do this without catastrophizing, to investigate our own histories with the same compassionate interest we would extend to a close friend who came to us confused about why a small moment had broken them open. The third lesson is perhaps the most radical, and it requires a willingness to expand your understanding of forgiveness far beyond the transaction. Most of us were taught to expect. Turkist calls it forgiving without resolution, and for many listeners, this will be the concept that either sets them free or infuriates them, depending on where they are in their journey. The cultural script most of us inherited tells us that forgiveness looks like a conversation. The person who hurt you acknowledges what they did. They express remorse. You extend forgiveness. There is a handshake or an embrace, and something is restored. This script is beautiful when it happens, but for the vast majority of significant wounds, it never does. The person who hurt you may have died, they may be unreachable, they may be fully aware of what they did and entirely uninterested in apologizing for it. They may have a version of events so different from yours that a productive conversation is simply not possible, or the harm may have been so deep and so repeated that reconciliation would require you to place yourself back in danger. Forgiving without resolution means accepting a deeply counterintuitive truth. Your healing is not contingent on their participation. You do not need them to show up for you to get free. This is the part that takes time to absorb, because it feels like it should not be true. It feels like it is asking too much. But consider what the alternative costs. Consider the person who has been waiting 30 years for an apology that is never coming, who has put their emotional recovery on hold, who has let the unresolved relationship define them, who has organized their sense of self around the wound rather than around their own capacity for growth. The person they are waiting for may not even remember the incident. They have moved on. The only one still imprisoned by the lack of resolution is the one waiting for it. In the world of modern coaching and therapeutic practice, this insight has transformed how practitioners work with clients who are processing trauma. The most effective approach is no longer wait for the offender to participate. They work with the wounded person to complete what needs to be completed inside themselves, to grieve what was lost, to name what was taken, to release the expectation of an apology that would repair what cannot be repaired from the outside. There are journaling practices, therapeutic letter writing exercises, somatic approaches, and mindfulness-based frameworks that all work from the same foundational premise that Turkis derives at from her faith tradition. The work of forgiveness happens inside you, and it can be finished inside you, regardless of what the other person does or does not do. The fourth lesson is the one that tends to arrive quietly, almost as an afterthought, but which may carry the most weight for the long-term architecture of your life. It is the lesson about what Lysa calls the markers, and it concerns the way we hold memory. When we experience significant pain, we tend to attach it to a fixed point in time. The betrayal happened in that year, in that house, with that person, and in our minds it lives there, unchanging, like a monument. Every time we return to it, we return with the same emotional charge, the same interpretation, the same conclusions about what it means and what it says about us and about the world. What Turkis discovered and what neuroscience increasingly confirms is that memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. And how we reconstruct it, the story we tell about it, the meaning we assign to it, has enormous power over the quality of our present experience. This does not mean rewriting history or pretending something did not happen. It means examining the interpretation you have been carrying and asking whether it is still serving you. Most of the stories we tell about our wounds contain a hidden sentence that goes something like this: and because this happened to me, it means that I am... That blank gets filled in differently for everyone. It is filled with words like unlovable, untrustworthy of good things, destined to be alone, fundamentally broken, invisible, not enough. The wound becomes evidence for a verdict we deliver against ourselves, and that verdict shapes every subsequent chapter. Lysa challenges us to revisit the evidence, to ask whether the pain we experienced says more about the brokenness of the person who caused it than it does about our own worth, to separate the event from the interpretation and to give ourselves permission to write a different conclusion, not a falsely positive one, but a truer one, for anyone building a life that requires self-belief and at this point in history. That means almost everyone navigating the freelance economy, the creator economy, the entrepreneurial landscape, or simply the daily challenge of showing up fully in their relationships. This reframing is not optional. You cannot scale a business from a foundation of "I am not enough." You cannot sustain a creative practice while secretly believing you do not deserve an audience. You cannot offer genuine mentorship while carrying a story that says people will eventually betray you. The markers of old pain become the invisible ceilings above every room you try to build. Identifying them, examining them, and consciously choosing a different interpretation is not therapy speak. It is architecture. It is the work of building a life that can actually hold the future you are trying to create. The fifth lesson is the one Turkhurst saves for last, and it is the one that requires the most from us, not because it is the most intellectually demanding, but because it calls us to a level of compassion that feels genuinely unreasonable until you understand what it is actually for. It is the lesson of humanizing the person who hurt you, not excusing them, not reconciling with them, not pretending the harm was less than it was, but understanding that they, too, are a human being who was shaped by forces they did not choose, who carries wounds of their own, who likely hurt you out of some combination of their own unprocessed pain and the limits of their capacity at the time. This is the most difficult practice in Turkhurst's entire framework, and it is also the one she is most careful to present in its proper context. She is not asking you to do this for their sake. She is asking you to do it for yours. Because dehumanizing the person who hurt you, turning them into a flat, irredeemable villain in your story actually keeps you more bound to them, not less. There is something that happens in the human psyche when we reduce another person to a single act or a series of acts. They become mythological. They grow larger in our minds than they were in life. Their power over our inner world inflates beyond anything that corresponds to reality. The villain in your story is always more powerful than the complicated, flawed, struggling human being they actually were. And a mythological villain is impossible to escape, because you carry them inside you. The moment you are willing to see even a sliver of their humanity, not their justification, not an excuse, but their humanity, they begin to shrink to their actual size, and as they shrink, the grip they have on your nervous system loosens. The rent they have been charging in your mind begins to decrease. You start to have more of yourself available for the life that is happening right now. Lysa shares the story of working through this practice with a person who devastated her most, and the honesty with which she describes her resistance, her fury, her repeated failures to sustain this perspective, is what makes it credible. She is not presenting this as a mountaintop experience available only to the spiritually advanced. She is presenting it as a gritty, non-linear, sometimes daily discipline that does not always feel like progress but gradually produces it. And the fruit of that discipline, she argues, is not a warm feeling toward the person who wronged you. It is a warm feeling toward your own life. It is the experience of waking up and not having the first thought of your day be about someone who hurt you years ago. It is the freedom of walking into a room without scanning it for threats shaped like the person who betrayed you. It is the deep cellular relief of no longer being at war. There is one more thread worth pulling here, one that Turkhurst weaves through the entire book but which deserves its own moment of emphasis. It concerns the relationship between forgiveness and grief. One of the reasons forgiveness feels so counterintuitive, so premature, so much like a betrayal of ourselves, is that we have not been given permission to fully grieve what was lost before we are asked to release the person who caused the loss. We skip the grief. We move too quickly to the resolution, either because the culture around us is uncomfortable with sustained pain or because we ourselves are afraid of what we might find if we let ourselves go all the way down into the sorrow. But unexpressed grief does not dissolve. It calcifies. It becomes the bitterness that flavors everything. It becomes the cynicism that poisons new beginnings before they have a chance to establish themselves. The process Turkhurst outlines is not a shortcut from hurt to healed. It moves through the grief deliberately, tenderly, insisting that what was lost be named and mourned before it is released. For the entrepreneur who lost a business partnership, for the parent whose adult child has cut off contact, for the spouse who discovered their entire life had been built on a lie, for the employee who was mentored and then thrown away, for the child who grew up in a home where love was conditional or absent or weaponized. For all of these people, and for the many more whose specific wounds do not fit neatly into categories, the invitation is the same. Grieve first. Nay, what was taken? Let the sorrow be proportionate to the loss. And then, from within that grief, begin the long and non-linear walk toward releasing the claim that pain has on your future. The consequences of not doing this work are not abstract. They show up in measurable, concrete ways in the quality of your daily life. They show up in the quality of your sleep, in the frequency of your anxiety, in the tone of your closest relationships, in the ceiling above your ambitions, in the distance you keep from anything that might hurt you again. They show up in your children, who learn from watching you, whether wounds are things that break people or things that are worked through. They show up in your body, which keeps a score that no amount of busyness can permanently outpace. The person who hurt you may be living their life completely unburdened by what they did to you. The only one being hurt by your unforgiveness now is you. That is not a guilt trip, that is a liberating fact. It means the power to change this has always been in your hands. You picked up this audiobook, or perhaps it found you at a moment that was probably not accidental. Something in the title or in the description spoke to something in you. That already knows it is time. Time to stop organizing your life around a wound. Time to stop giving the best of your energy to someone who is probably not thinking about you at all. Time to reclaim the future that has been sitting on the side of this work, waiting. The 5 lessons explored here: understanding that forgiveness is not approval, following the trail of pain to its source, releasing the need for resolution before you heal, rewriting the meaning you have attached to your wounds, and humanizing. The person who hurt you are not a linear checklist. They are a set of tools you will return to repeatedly, in different seasons, for different wounds, at different depths. Growth is not a straight line, but it is movement, and movement, over time, carries you further from the place where the pain defines you and closer to the place where your capacity for love, including love for yourself, becomes the thing that defines you instead. Do not wait for the right moment, the right therapist, the right conversation, the right apology. That waiting is itself a wound. The most important thing you can do after listening to this is to begin, not to finish, not to resolve everything. Simply to begin, to pick up a journal, to call someone you trust, to sit with one memory that has been sitting with you and ask it one honest question: what is this still doing here? The answer to that question is the beginning of everything.